So in this video, I'm going to show you guys a crucial part of lifting things off the ground, and that is the idea of not using your back to lift, but instead bending at the hips to lift. This is also known as hip hinging, so listen up. And first off, before we get going, please subscribe to RyleyRehab. Every single week I'm coming up with new content just like this, ultimately helping you become the expert of your own body. So this video is just a continue from my last week's video, which was basically showing the main ways you would pick up a box without having to strain your back. This is really good if you're going through a back injury. However, one bit I didn't mention is the whole idea of keeping your spine straight and then bending at the hips, hip hinging like this, instead of bending at the spine and curling this way. To give you guys a bit of a visual here, when this skeleton bends down, when you look here, he's actually bending down at the hips right here, but his spine joint up here is staying relatively straight. Now this guy's spine doesn't really bend, but this is what it would look like when your spine's bending. So the big idea is that in general, the spine is more fragile than the hip. So the more you can bend here, the easier it'll be when you're lifting things, especially heavy things, and especially if you're going through back pain. You see this from a practical angle. The big difference is if you see somebody lifting with their back, not hip hinging, it would look more like this. You'd have this cannonball look right here. Whereas when someone's lifting with their hips, their back would actually be a little bit arched, similar to the way it would be when you're standing. A little bit of an arch there. And then the stress comes off the back, but then much more goes through the hips and the legs. Now this can be one of the hardest things to teach, so I wanted to dedicate this video specifically for it. In general, you have to figure out how to basically separate your spine from your hips. Now it doesn't mean pulling yourself apart, but it means you want to be able to make sure each movement goes in a different direction. And there's many methods for this, but the one that I find the most helpful is called the cat-cow method, where basically you do the exercise. You may be familiar with this already. It's called the cat-cow, and basically all you do is you get on both hands and both knees, and then you proceed to look down at the ground. And at that point, you just want to imagine there's a string pulling you right in the middle of the back there. And the whole idea is it should feel like it's curling you up like this. And then you do the exact opposite, where you arch your back as much as you can, creating kind of a U shape right here. And just do this exercise regularly. I would say just do 10 of these 3 times a day, because it will really help you get a bit of an awareness of how your spine is. Now, of course, I know you're going to ask me, how the heck does this help with me lifting things? And where it does help is because you can actually transition it to get used to that position of you having the more arched back versus you having the more rounded back. In general, you do want to be in that neutral position, which is a slight arch of the back, meaning not too far forward and not too far back. However, practically, it's usually better, especially when you're bending forward, to think about going more back, because your body will much more tend to go forward. Anyways, back to the cat-cow. So what you're going to do next is the progression from this. As soon as you've done this for a few days, you got a really good awareness, you're able to go up and down, you know what to do. The next thing you should do is find a mirror, and the mirror should be exactly where the camera is, just right on a side angle of yourself. Keep your hands on your knees. Look sideways at the mirror, at yourself, and you should be able to kind of draw a line down your spine like that. While keeping your hands on your knees, you're going to do the exact same cat-cow exercise, only with your hands on your knees instead of with your hands and knees on the ground. So same idea, you curl back at the spine here, and then you arch. Sometimes it can help to look up when you arch as well, and then look down when you curl. But this here is exactly what you should be doing. Ideally, the more you can kind of be hunched over forward, the better. Be careful if you do have a sore back on this, because it can fatigue it, but this is a really good one to get used to. And same idea, you want to do sets of about 10 or whatever you can handle. The big idea is to get the awareness, because where this carries over is now when you're going to be lifting things. Imagine you're lifting something at knee height. You want to imagine you're in the arched position like this, or at least in a neutral position, but not in that hunched forward position. So as long as you have that awareness, you can kind of hold that position. And then the next step would be just to try these without your hands on your knees, and then just dangling instead. And then eventually, when you know this is a position you should be holding, you can actually do the exact same thing, but put your hands on an object you're trying to lift. Now in general, you don't want it to be too low because at a certain point it's going to be impossible to keep that straight spine. But I would say something maybe halfway down the shins, 1/3 down the shins, something like this. You can do the exact same thing. Just keep your hands on that object and then follow the exact same routine right there. Going forward and then going back. Now, as a quick thing, and you may already notice this with me, I am not flexible enough to keep that perfect arch when I'm down in this position. And you will get to a point where it does become really hard to do it. But I would say when you get down here, just try to go backwards as much as you comfortably can. Everyone's going to hit that point where they can do as much as they can. And the more you can get away from being in this cannonball position, the better. So once you have that idea, just imagine you're holding that arched up position. And then from that point, it should make it a lot easier to lift things up because you're just holding that arched position from the way up until you get all the way to the top. I do have to stress it's very important that you do this sideways looking in a mirror because the body awareness is key for this. You really need to know exactly where your spine is at all times. Now the last thing I know some people are going to ask me, should I do this all the time, every time I pick something up? The short answer is no, you don't necessarily need to. However, if you are going through any back pain, if you're lifting up anything that's really heavy, or if you're doing anything very quickly, then it's often best to keep everything in that spine neutral. Oh, and he smacked me. To keep everything in the spine neutral and instead bend at the hips as well, because ultimately the hips tend to be more durable than the back versus a lot of these forces. So I hope this video helped. Please like it if you found this helpful, and I will see you next time.